frontline workers, because most people were scared to leave their homes, but yet they were going to work every day. I can't thank them enough. And our teachers, who we've seen our school system right across the country stay open and continue to ensure solid education for all students, which is crucial. And then I have to thank, of course, the businesses, because we were in need quickly of PPEs, and we were in need of gowns and gloves and whatnot. And it's our company, our own company right across the country from all provinces, all ridings, that were able to find ways to support Canadians. And that, it was extremely important. Then it was a question of making sure we could find vaccines. And that, as you know, is a very tough challenge to be able to get that done very quickly. Again, I want to thank our researchers and the health organizations and the country, all countries working together to help and meet those needs. And you know, we were ahead of everybody in the G7 in getting the vaccinations. And today, as we speak, we have over 90% of Canadians that had at least one dose. Now, what type of programs that we use to help Canadians? Well, we had the CERB, of course, for people that guaranteed $500 a week for up to 4 months to help them. We had the wage subsidy, because we wanted people to stay at work if at all possible. We knew that the companies were struggling and couldn't keep them to work. But instead of keeping them at home, we could keep them at work. So we offered the wage subsidy 90%, which was extremely important. Then we've seen all kinds, the recovery benefits as well that we move forward. Those are some of the programs, Mr. Speaker, that we put together to allow Canadians to pull through this very important pandemic. And as you know, I will have the opportunity to go more into details on how our government invested in various fundings. But I can tell you right now that we have spent over $72 billion in supporting Canadians through the pandemic, and we'll continue. Thank you.
For the member, that he'll have about 4.5 minutes when he returns after. Statement by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in the House today to recognize a unique and effective approach to domestic violence prevention and education happening in my community and reaching people throughout North America. She is Your Neighbor is a powerful awareness project and storytelling series created by the incredible team at Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region. The podcast explores the realities and complexities of domestic violence. They talk about the many types of abuse. They address myths about victims and survivors. They discuss the role of men and more. Throughout this series, they emphasize that we all have a role to play in ending domestic violence. Their third season comes out in May and features some amazing guests, including Anna Maria Tremonti. I invite all colleagues in this House, and in fact all Canadians, to listen in for themselves. They can find She Is Your Neighbor wherever they download podcasts or online at sheisyourneighbor.com. Thanks for the chance to share.
The honourable member for Scarborough Rouge Park.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to Mrs. Kamalambika Kandasamy, a brave mother of the Tamil nation. Throughout 2008 and until May 2009, Mrs. Kandasamy worked day and night as a pharmacist embedded with the Tamil medical team in Mullawaikal. As makeshift hospitals were targeted and bombed by the Sri Lankan armed forces, she fearlessly helped thousands of survivors. The world ignored her pleas in 2009, but heard her loud and clear as she became a critical witness and voice to the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide of her people. She campaigned for accountability and justice, seeking to end impunity of Sri Lankan officials by speaking at the United Nations Human Rights Council, advocating to our Minister of Foreign Affairs and many other world leaders. Until her last breath, she supported the mothers of the disappeared, raised money to support survivors, and ensured those who made the ultimate sacrifice were never forgotten, including her only son, Tivaharan. May she rest in peace, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for South Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to commemorate the life of my friend, Walter Wally Phillips. The son of Ukrainian immigrants, Wally was born in Saskatchewan before moving to BC, where he began several careers in his life. He was a fixture in the White Rock community, a fellow Rotarian, former president of the Richmond Chamber of Commerce, and a dedicated champion of medical rehabilitation programs, mental health, and the like. Wally was a passionate community leader and volunteer. He often reached out to me with welcome and wise advice and will be greatly missed by many. Above all else, Wally was a family man. When his delightful wife, Kay, passed away, he said it felt like he had lost his right arm. Sadly, his son, Alan, passed away 6 days after him. Wally's legacy will live on through his remaining children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren while he rests peacefully with his brother, sister, son, and Kay. He believed they would all be together on the other side, and I have no doubt they are. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in the House to highlight an incredible young woman from my riding who died much too early on Tuesday. Nally.
Tess and Jess, her partner V, her wonderful large Filipino family, and her many, many friends and followers. Nally faced life with cancer with courage, creativity, and humor as she shared her daily challenges on social and public media, as well as in her beautiful book of poetry and observations in The Diary of Nally. Today we mourn Nally, but as she said in her own words, I want to be remembered by how I made you feel in my presence. I want to be remembered for always giving it my best. And despite how I felt or what was said, I never stopped believing in me and you. I don't want to be admired. I want you to feel inspired. Through you and your inspired living is how I wish to leave my legacy. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, it's with emotion, recognition, and conviction that I rise today in this House to mark Lavender Day for Epilepsy. With emotion, because I'm the mother of Ulysse, an extraordinary 4-year-old boy who has been grappling with epilepsy since he was just 10 months old. With recognition, because the 100,000 Quebecers who live with epilepsy can count on healthcare professionals, organizations such as Epilepsy Quebec, and people like you and me who support them. And with conviction, because I'm certain that all of the support that we bring, all of the efforts that we make, such as supporting these organizations or symbolic gestures such as wearing lavender, will improve the lives of people who live with epilepsy. On behalf of myself and the Bloc Québécois, thank you for your solidarity on March 26th by wearing lavender for all of the Ulysses of this world. The honourable member for Gatineau. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As we in Quebec mark Intellectual Disability Week, I would like to salute the excellent work being done in the Outaouais by several devoted and passionate organizations. As an example, let me cite the Outaouais Association for Community Integration, which is celebrating 65 years of work in our community this year. The association's mission is to offer services to people with intellectual disabilities and to their families, and to work to facilitate their community, social, and professional integration. I'm thinking, for example, of Marie-Ève, who has already visited a parliament. And when I have visited the association, I've seen with my own eyes the impact that this organization has on the lives of the people it serves, thanks to the work of its employees and its volunteers. Thank you to the whole team. Thank you to the families. And thank you, of course, to the volunteers for your incredible work with people with intellectual disabilities. Happy 65th birthday and a long life to the association. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, today 30% of the seats in the House of Commons are held by women. March 24th is Agnes MacPhail Day in celebration of her birthday and honoring her as the first woman elected here to this chamber just over 100 years ago. Agnes was first elected to federal politics to represent the riding of Grey Southeast and would later represent the Grey Bruce riding, part of the riding I have the honor of representing. Last night, I had the privilege of listening to the winning speeches of the 76th Annual Grey County Federation of Agriculture Public Speaking Contest. What stood out to me was the overwhelming majority of the student participants were young women. I'm confident in saying many of them will be future leaders in the riding across Canada, especially in the cultural, political, and agricultural fields. I hope all members will join me in recognizing the historic and inspiring contributions Agnes made to Canada and to honor her as a pioneer who inspired and continues to inspire women across this country to take their place in the House of Commons.
The Honourable Member for Vimy.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Le 25.
Tomorrow, March 25th, will be the 201st anniversary of the Greek War of Independence, and I wish to highlight its importance, not just for Canadians of Greek descent, but also for people the world over.
A reminder that this day is dedicated to all those who love liberty and freedom, and a warning to all who would deny them these human values. This is a moment for Greeks to celebrate and an invitation for all to follow the spirit of the Greek Revolution in fighting oppression. In light of the threat of Russian aggression in Ukraine, I would like to acknowledge the struggle of countless Ukrainian men, women, and children who have been displaced, killed, or wounded, and the millions fighting for their sovereignty, identity, and freedom. As long as there are heroes ready to sacrifice for justice and liberty, the Greek spirit of freedom and democracy will live on. Slava Ukraini, Zito i 25 Martiu, Zito i Elas, Vive le Canada.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg South Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the grade 7 and 8 students at École River Heights School wrote to me asking for support in assisting Ukrainian refugees to find safe harbor in Canada quickly. All 449 students at the school signed the letter, and it was hand-delivered to my office. I visited students at the school to hear more about how they feel about the conflict, the role of economic sanctions, humanitarian aid, and how Canada will help Ukraine rebuild after the war. Their questions and comments reveal a depth of intelligence and thoughtfulness reflective of what I know to be true about young people. They are insightful, passionate, and want to talk about topics that are challenging, complex, and even unsettling. I left the students with this message: get engaged, take your ambitions, your aspirations as citizens, as members of family and community, and put it to work for our nation. You are our future, and our future is bright. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, earlier today I tabled legislation which would mandate operational collision avoidance systems for gliding clubs in Canada. C259 is the result of a commitment I made to Martina and Bradley Lineweber of Calgary, who lost their son Adam in a 2019 crash. The tow plane's anti-collision system, which significantly reduces the risk of mid-air collisions, was not working at the time, and there is actually no requirement that they be used in Canada. Members should be aware that there have been 30 confirmed incidents or near misses involving gliders since 2010, 9 involving commercial aircraft. The Linewebers have been trying to change that, and I hope this House will support them. This is not a partisan issue, Mr. Speaker. It is an issue of safety for all Canadians, and we must take the necessary steps to ensure another life is not lost.
The Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, this January my community lost 2 local icons when a tree tragically fell through their West Vancouver home in a windstorm. Mike Sharp and Carolyn Helbig contributed immeasurably to the fabric of the community of West Vancouver and Horseshoe Bay. Carolyn's deep connection to nature led her to be one of the founding members of the Coalition to Save Eagle Ridge Bluffs. Her husband Mike, known as Sharpie to his friends, coached and was president of West Vancouver Minor Hockey and was an integral part of the local pickup hockey scene. Together they helped raise over $300,000 for the Feed the Need program in West Vancouver to provide food for vulnerable seniors at the onset of the pandemic. The community has come together to set up 2 memorial scholarships in their honor, one in environmental stewardship and the other to help kids who want to play hockey, which has raised over $30,000 in just a few short weeks. While the loss of these two incredible people will be acutely felt, their legacy will live on and continue to reverberate around the community that they love so much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is time that we get serious about green energy in Canada. That means getting serious about nuclear energy. The IPCC has called on an increase of nuclear energy as much as 500% for the environment. Nuclear provided 90% of the power which was needed to phase out coal in Ontario. Not wind, not solar, but nuclear did it, Mr. Speaker. This represented North America's largest greenhouse gas reduction. If not for nuclear, it would not have happened. Nuclear energy is not a sin stock. It is our only hope. And it is incredibly disappointing that the government's green bond framework treats it like a sin stock, insulting the men and women who work hard every day to create zero carbon electricity and life-saving medical isotopes. The unscientific, anti-nuclear bias of the Canadian Green Bond Framework must change today.
Here, here. The honourable member for Desnethe, Nisnipi, Churchill River.
Mr. Speaker, today is World Tuberculosis Day. More than 4,000 people die every day from TB. Today we stand in solidarity with people who suffer from TB and the millions who have lost their lives. Before COVID-19, TB was the deadliest infectious disease, claiming the lives of 1.4 million people every year, despite being both preventable and curable. Over the past several months, the communities of Black Lake, Fond du Lac, and Pelican Narrows in my riding have announced TB outbreaks. Dozens of outbreaks, over 100 cases, many of them children. These outbreaks underscore the need for the government to step up and act on its previous commitments to TB elimination. Indigenous Services Canada admitted that the development of a TB reduction action plan for First Nations was not completed as promised. Mr. Speaker, Canada must reaffirm its commitment to address the health inequities that allow TB to persist in northern Saskatchewan and all of Canada.
The honourable member for Alfred Pellan.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, from March 20th to 27th, we are celebrating the important work done by home meal delivery services which help those, mostly seniors, who need a helping hand with the preparation and home delivery of hot meals. This work is essential in helping people stay in their homes as long as possible while giving some welcome respite to caregivers. Despite the challenges of the last 2 years, these services, which mainly depend on volunteers, have been able to continue their important work serving seniors. In Alfred Pellan, our services benefit from federal support through the PNHA funds, but I am also working to create a link between our generous business community and our meal services who need their help. Thank you to the services and volunteers of Alfred Pellan, SBEVA, Maison de la Famille de Saint-François, Bonjour aujourd'hui et après, Popote Roulante Saint-Noël Chabanel, and Société de Saint-Vincent de Paul. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, there is a critical shortage of affordable housing in my community. Many people have given up on the idea of ever owning a home, but even finding an affordable place to rent is getting further and further out of reach. And BC has not been getting its fair share of federal funding under the Rapid Housing Initiative. Worse still, the supply of older rental stock is being bought up by REITs, real estate income trusts, that use tactics like rent evictions to jack up the rent, pushing people out of their homes and removing affordable units from our market. Housing advocates and the City of Victoria are calling for a federal acquisition fund to give local governments and nonprofits the quick capital to buy properties at risk of being bought up by these predatory REITs. We must preserve our existing affordable housing stock. It's time for the federal government to return to the table as a true partner with municipalities, Indigenous governments, and cooperatives to stop treating housing as an investment and start treating housing as a human right.
The honourable member for Salaberry-Surwa. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to celebrate the week of home meal delivery services in Quebec, and particularly to highlight the 50th anniversary of Salaberry's Meals on Wheels program. This organization was founded on March 7, 1972, and it exists to help seniors stay in their homes for the longest time possible. The congregation of the Sœurs de Notre-Dame de Bon Conseil and many volunteers were behind the very first meal delivered in our community. And today, over 1,200 meals are delivered each and every week by Salaberry de Valleyfield Meals on Wheels. In Quebec, there are over 300 meal delivery services that every day are the face of solidarity in our communities. They form a chain of support thanks to the work of 10,000 volunteers who are there each and every day to cook and deliver healthy and balanced meals. These teams visit over 30,000 seniors, often seniors living alone, and are there to help them. So it's an honor, Mr. Speaker, for me to thank all of the volunteers and all of the voted teams who make the difference in the lives of seniors in Salaberry-sur-Loire.
The Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, it is wonderful today to be joined by my family here in Ottawa. Hear, hear. Juno Beach is one of the most sacred places in Canadian military history. The bravery of 14,000 Canadians who landed there on D-Day continues to inspire generations of Canadians and led directly to the liberation of Europe from tyranny and fascism. A condo development threatens not only the beach, but the operations of the Juno Beach Centre, a museum and memorial which educates hundreds of thousands of visitors of the role Canada played in bringing freedom to Europe. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, this development should not go forward. In an increasingly polarized world, few truly sacred places remain. In the hearts and minds of Canadians, Juno Beach transcends and represents all that we take pride in as a nation. That we will make a larger impact than our size commands, that we will stand firmly alongside our friends and allies. No matter the difficulty, we will fight beyond just convening all that is good and right in the world. I have one ask of this government: do everything in your power to save Juno Beach.
The Honourable Member for Whitby.
Mr. Speaker, all across Canada and especially in my riding of Whitby, small businesses are the backbone of our economy. And after 2 challenging years, it is time for good news. That's why I was happy to join the minister responsible for the Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario to announce funding for the revitalization of downtown Whitby and downtown Brooklyn through the My Main Street Local Business Accelerator Program. Downtown Whitby and Brooklyn will be supported with 3 dedicated Main Street ambassadors, customized market research, data analysis, and non-repayable funding contributions for new and existing small businesses. This will support our community by assisting our existing businesses to bounce back from the pandemic and enhance the ability of our new startups to rapidly grow. Mr. Speaker, the entrepreneurial spirit in Whitby is strong, and I look forward to seeing our unique, resilient, and diverse small business community thrive all along our main streets. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, question orale. The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Reno Lakes.
Speaker, according to the Minister of Health, there are many different factors to consider before lifting mandates. And he said, quote, "It's quite complicated," end quote. Well, health officers across Canada have worked through these complications and have ended their mandates. So, if it is not complicated for the provinces, why is it complicated for this minister?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know this might sound a bit complicated, so let me get that very simple. 8,000 and 25,000. 8,000 is a number of people who today will have received either their first or their second dose. 25,000 is a number of people who today will be receiving their booster dose. Mr. Speaker, we're very grateful to them, not only for protecting their health, but for protecting the health of those we love.
Absolutely. The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, on Monday, Speaker, I asked the Health Minister what the national vaccination target would need to be for Canada to achieve before they lifted the mandates. His response that our booster uptake was too low. Well, next week it will be that case counts could be off, or the following week that wastewater surveillance numbers were askew, and the goalposts will keep on moving. What numbers do Canadians have to hit before the minister agrees to lift the mandates?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me again thank not only my colleague, who I enjoy the company and the work of, but also all Canadians. And let me say that vaccination mandates that opposition Conservative MPs opposed during the campaign have saved not hundreds of lives, but thousands of lives. Estimates are that about 1,600 people in the last few months have had their lives saved for only that purpose, which is vaccination mandates. Absolutely. Obviously, had we not had vaccination in the last year in Canada, we would currently not be meeting in this room. We would be locked down. We would be closing schools. We would be closing shops and stores and factories.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Speaker, the vaccine mandates that they imposed at the time have served their purpose according to the top experts in every province across this country. 10 out of 10 chief medical officers of health have said it's time to end the mandates and lift the mask mandates. So what are the metrics that this federal health minister is going to follow so that he will then catch up to all of the provinces and our allies who have accepted the science and ended the mandates?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
And I'm grateful to the member for his work and for admitting, and I think he knew that already many weeks ago, that vaccination mandates did work. Not only did they save lives, I spoke about the 1,600 Canadians who are currently alive because of those vaccination mandates, having been not infected and sent to a hospital and then dying because of vaccination, but also large numbers of dollars, Mr. Speaker. $4 billion is the estimate that we saved collectively, household income, small businesses' income, because of vaccination mandates.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins, Lévis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The provinces and our international allies have eliminated a number of their health measures, but this NDP Liberal government is quicker to reach secret agreements than to lift mandates on domestic flights. Doesn't it know that Canadians have had enough? When will this NDP Liberal Prime Minister look at what is happening in other G7 countries and lift mandates federally, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Health Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm trying to be as nonpartisan as possible, but the member was not there before the last election, and perhaps she doesn't realize that about a year and a month ago, her party said that the Canadians were going to be the last people vaccinated in the world, that we wouldn't be vaccinated before 2030. But Canadians were vaccinated in large numbers before many other countries. So that's a gift that we've received from science. It's a gift that we should all be very grateful for, and we should benefit from it. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, I'm here, and I know what's happening. The NDP Liberal government hasn't been following science for a long time. They've used the pandemic to make political gains, but Canadians aren't fooled. They realize what's happening. Even their colleague from Louis Hébert has denounced the government. Will the Minister of Health finally end these political games and lift the mandates today? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is not a political question. It's a question of responsibility. When we form government, we have to be responsible, not only as a government, but everyone here in this House. And I think that there are members of the Conservative Party. Well, they seem to have declared that COVID is over, they don't need masks anymore, but COVID is still with us. And we see that there will many people that are going to be affected. So we need to be careful, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, 3 weeks ago, the Liberals and the NDP voted for a block motion that said that the Quebec nation should not lose its political representation in terms of numbers of members in Ottawa. But today they tabled Bill C-14, which, yes, confirms that we won't lose any seats, but they've added so many elsewhere that we lose our political clout anyway. So it's just another way to undermine us, Mr. Speaker. That's what's happening. Why does the government want to reduce Quebec's political representation? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, what we did this morning is that we tabled a bill that is realistic and it actually protects the seats in Quebec, Mr. Speaker. So instead of going to 77, they're staying at 78. So unlike the Bloc Québécois, who wants to reopen the Constitution because so they want to open the Constitution, whereas we want to solve the problem today right away in the most practical way possible for Quebec. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that this government doesn't know how to count. What counts for Quebec is not the number of seats, but the relative political representation. So even if we keep 78 seats, but if there are 343, then 350, then 400, it doesn't work. And you don't need a doctorate to figure that out, Mr. Speaker. So, by not taking seats away, they won't pick a fight with Quebec, but they're not protecting our political representation, and that means that they're not keeping their promise. This NDP Liberal government has voted to protect the Quebec nation, so why won't they protect its political representation here? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, there are 35 Liberal members here from Quebec. They're proud of being Quebecers. They're here to defend Quebec. And today we have tabled a bill that guarantees that the 78 seats of Quebec will be maintained, whereas the Bloc Québécois, all it wants to do is reopen constitutional squabbles. And that's just good for the industry of drama. So we are the ones protecting the Bloc Québécois. The Honourable Member of Burnaby South.
Marks 30 days of the war in Ukraine, and President Zelensky has asked the world to reflect on what that means. When he spoke here in the House of Commons, he asked us to imagine what the war means and what it would mean to Canadians, and he asked for help. And one of the most important ways that we can help and are helping is by welcoming people from Ukraine. But recent reports are showing that people who come here from Ukraine aren't getting the help that they need. So what is the government going to do to ensure that Ukrainians fleeing a humanitarian crisis get refuge in Canada and the support and help that they need?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his questions, and certainly Canada will provide a safe haven for those fleeing Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine. And since January, Canada has welcomed more than 10,000 Ukrainians. And last week, as we know, we launched our new Canada-Ukrainian emergency travel authorization that will make it easier, faster, and safer for Ukrainians to come here in Canada. We're working with our partners, Mr. Speaker, including provinces and territories, the business communities, the Ukrainian Canadian community, and settlement organization on how best to support people arriving from Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue.
Member for Burnaby South.
On a parlé avec les gens.
We've spoken with people, and according to reports, the Ukrainians who are coming to Canada are not getting the assistance they need. So we are calling on the government to recognize that this is the 30th day of the war. Ukrainians keep on requiring help, and the best way that we can help them is by ensuring that we welcome them and offer them the support they need. What is the government going to do to ensure that the Ukrainians who come to Canada receive the help and support that they need to have a good life here in Canada? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. And we totally agree with him. We have to help them, and that is why we launched last week the new Canada-Ukraine Emergency Travel Authorization, which will allow Ukrainians to come to Canada. We're working with our partners, including the provinces and territories, the business community, communities, Canada-Ukraine community centers, because that's the best way to help people who are coming from Ukraine. We continue to monitor the volume of people coming from Ukraine, and we'll take the measures necessary.
Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, all 10 provinces and most G7 countries around the world are lifting the mandates. Despite this, federal mandates around vaccines for employment and travel persist. At Health Committee, we've already heard the Minister of Health talk specifically around the plan to end federal mandates, but he didn't quite make it, Mr. Speaker. He talked about this complicated science and did not elaborate further. What we would like to know on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, is what is this complicated science that the NDP Liberal government is not sharing, and when will the Minister make it available to all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me try again, thanks for the question, to make that very simple. One number this time instead of two. So 135,000. That's the number of Americans whose deaths were avoidable because of the fact that they had been vaccinated to the extent that we have been in Canada, in part due to vaccination mandates. They would not have died. Those lives, Mr. Speaker, have a value. How much it is in dollar, very few people will know, I suppose, but these have personal, health, human, social, and family values.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his non-answer reply to that question. We know there are countless employees federally that are off work who sadly perhaps have not been immunized. What about Douglas, who's a federal scientist, Mr. Speaker, and he has a unique story in that he's had COVID twice, and he's also in an antibody study from the Ottawa Health Research Institute. Interestingly enough, and shockingly, he works at home, and he's still not allowed to go to work. How can this happen? When will this federal government stop politicizing this and discriminating against hardworking Canadians, and the date they can go back to work?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We spoke about responsibility, being responsible, being obviously kind to each other. I'll try to be even more simple. No, instead of 135,000, three, that's a simple number. 3 times is how many more deaths we would have had in Canada if we had followed the example of the United States when it comes to public health measures, vaccination rates. 3 times more people dying, Mr. Speaker. That's 60,000 more people in Canada who would have died.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, many Canadians can't travel. They can't leave this country. Many have been terminated, and they have been othered by this government for long enough. The government's top doctor stated that vaccine mandates aren't effective anymore, yet the health minister won't discuss any timelines, benchmarks, or plans for ending them. He's not taking the hints from provinces. He's not taking cues from our international allies. He's not listening to his own experts. So on what day, in what year, will the health minister end the federal mandates that nobody is telling him to keep?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We would all like to be able to declare the date on which COVID-19 will disappear. That would be marvelous, Mr. Speaker, and I would certainly be the happiest man on earth in this Parliament, certainly, to be able to tell you, Mr. Speaker, on what date this COVID-19 will disappear. Unfortunately, I don't know.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Unions would be better if the minister cared about workers even half as much as he does about optics. Employers in the air transportation are experiencing worker shortages. They are terminating experienced workers because of the federal mandates. The very workers who were mandated to work through the pandemic are the same workers who are now on the verge of losing their livelihoods for good. The transportation minister can end the interim order on mandates before he strips workers of their pensions, of their benefits, and of the years of service. That's before April 16th. So why is the Minister of Health saying no?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Speaker, I thank my colleague for this question.
but I really want to ask her to remind Canadians that vaccination is not a punishment. Vaccines have saved lives of communities, have saved our economy, have saved jobs. I understand that there are questions about when these mandates will be lifted. We will continue to follow science and advice, and I ask the honourable member to avoid partisanship in the face of vaccination and science.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, the Health Minister talks a lot about numbers. I'm wondering if he can tell us whether mental health, particularly the mental health of Canadians who still today can't work or travel to see loved ones because of the mandates, whether mental health is one of the metrics being considered in regards to lifting the mandates. If so, what specifically are those mental health metrics?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased and a bit touched by this question. It's true that mental health of Canadians has been deeply affected by the last 2 years. We estimate that about one Canadian out of two, has seen his or her mental health deteriorated over the last few months. For healthcare workers, it's about 3/4. Now, healthcare workers have been at the front line of this crisis.
I'll let the minister restart.
So I was going to point to healthcare workers. Obviously, we are deeply thankful to them, but thankfulness is not enough. We need to think of them, and we need to act in a way that protects them too, if we want them to protect us as well.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, even after the imposition of vaccine mandates, some Canadians chose to remain unvaccinated. Many of them sacrificed jobs and their ability to travel to see loved ones because of their authentic anxiety about COVID vaccines. The Prime Minister's response was to go on television and proclaim that many of those Canadians were, quote, racists and misogynists. What does the minister have to say about the mental health impact of a Prime Minister publicly shaming Canadians who experience genuine anxiety that has undeniably caused them legitimate hardship?
That's shameful. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And hardship is the right word. And I was speaking yesterday with the Association of Canadian Pharmacists, another example of healthcare workers who have been at the front line, living very difficult times. Their mental, personal stress has been heightened by COVID. The stress of their family when they go home after a day at work, the stress of their staff, and the stress of the patients that they have cared for almost now more than 2 years. So it's an example of the hardship that we have gone through. That's why we need to keep caring for each other.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the NDP Liberal agreement has so many intrusions into our areas of jurisdiction. It's like they're jumping in with both feet. Housing, pharmacare, childcare, healthcare, long-term care, encroachment coast to coast to coast. But there would be a much better way to help people get the right services. For example, transfer the sums that Quebec and the provinces need, give a right to opt out with full compensation in areas of jurisdiction. So yes or no, will there be this right to opt out with full compensation, but without conditions? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois is referring to an agreement that will help fight climate change that's good for Quebecers. Support for workers that's good for Quebecers. More social housing that's good for Quebecers. Working together on healthcare that's good for Quebecers. But when all that's good for Quebecers, it's not good for the Bloc Québécois. Why? The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the climate crisis. When we read the NDP Liberal Marriage Pact, it's very clear. Areas of jurisdiction do not exist. But what's not clear is their will to put an end to dirty oil. They want to develop a plan to gradually eliminate government subsidies in the fossil fuel sector. Develop a plan to gradually eliminate. That certainly doesn't sound urgent to me. Is this the decision of the Liberal Party or that of the NDP to continue to fund the oil patch in the midst of a climate crisis? The Honourable Minister of Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, and I would like to remind him that we have committed to eliminating subsidies to fossil fuel 2 years earlier than everyone else in the G20. 2 years earlier than all of our partners in the G20. That's what we're going to do, and we're going to work with our colleagues from the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, if they're interested, to further this file. Thank you. The Honourable Member from Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, in their agreement, the so-called specialists of the NDP and the Liberal Party have chosen to explain to Quebec and the provinces what they need, how many nurses and doctors they need to hire, where to put their money, and how to manage their healthcare systems. But, Mr. Speaker, healthcare expertise is not here or in the benches across the way or beside me. Quebec and the provinces are the ones who know what they need. As we head into a sixth wave, will the government finally increase with no conditions the health transfers to 35%? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has already said that there would be an increase in health transfers, and the Bloc Québécois knows that. They've known it for a long time, but they just want to squabble. They want to just, squabble here, squabble there. But constitutional squabbling, that doesn't give jobs to anyone, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't put more doctors or nurses into hospitals. And it doesn't help heal people, Mr. Speaker. It just allows the Bloc Québécois to be very theatrical. So I'm going to say, yes, they like squabbling.
I know.
The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday in the Health Committee, the Minister of Health said, and I quote, "We want to apply the least disruptive measures in order to protect the health and safety of Canadians, and the conversation will evolve as the situation evolves." The situation has evolved. We are asking the federal government to follow the science and remove federal mandates, as has been done throughout Canada in our provinces. Does the health minister believe that all 10 provincial chief medical officers of health are wrong?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the question that gives me the opportunity to continue speaking about the hardship and stress that many Canadians feel, including healthcare workers, but obviously patients. We have seen over the last 2 years a backlog of surgeries approximately equal to 700,000 patients, their families, their friends, and their communities affected by that backlog. Still today, Mr. Speaker, we have about 4,000 people hospitalized. Those hospital beds are not available for other patients.
Honourable Member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, that was a complete non-answer. The risks have changed as this pandemic has evolved. Canada has the most restrictive domestic travel mandates across the country, across the world, in fact. This is having a very real impact on families. I have been contacted by families in my riding that want to visit relatives that are in palliative care and attend funerals. Vaccine mandates on travel have limited their ability of families being able to gather. When will the health minister show some humanity and finally allow the transportation minister to remove domestic travel restrictions?
Here, here. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we all agree and we're all thankful for the humanity. Humanity, Mr. Speaker, means thinking about others and caring for others. I'll just mention the fact that on average in the last week, we've had about 50 to 60 additional deaths. Now, these are not numbers. Those are people whose families obviously are very much impacted. Now, 4,000 people being hospitalized, that's a large number of people, Mr. Speaker. Humanity demands that we look after them while we repair and prepare the healthcare system for the future challenges we'll be seeing.
The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, according to the health minister, there's no end in sight for the federal COVID mandates. The Liberals have destroyed lives and careers. Many have lost mortgages. Others have had to leave the country altogether. But a Canadian is a Canadian, regardless of a medical condition or choice. Workers and families deserve respect, not abuse. They deserve basic accommodation and accessibility. When will the health minister drop the federal mandates so the mass firings in April won't happen?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have to choose between vaccination, which is not punishment, but protection, and lockdown. We can't have no vaccination and no lockdowns. Now, the fact that they don't seem to believe in March 2022 in vaccination is something very serious, Mr. Speaker, because if we didn't have vaccination, if we didn't keep insisting on vaccination, we would be closing schools, shops, stores, factories. We'd be overloading hospitals with patients. We would be, Mr. Speaker, not meeting in this room today.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
On this day, World Tuberculosis Day, I rise to ask a question about housing. An MLA for Nunavut has identified that approximately 3,000 to 5,000 new housing units are urgently needed for people living in my territory. But the government's housing announcement in Nunavut a couple of weeks ago included just 101 new units. What rationale does the federal government have for promising only 100 housing units when thousands are desperately needed?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for her important question. The program that the Honourable Member referred to is just one of many programs in the National Housing Strategy and federal investments in Nunavut housing, including the Canada Housing Benefit, the agreement between Canada and Nunavut for the bilateral housing agreement, and over $400 million in distinctions-based funding for Inuit-led housing in Inuit Nunangat. By working together with territorial and Indigenous partners, we will address the housing needs of Nunavut Mute. Merci beaucoup.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Putin's horrific actions is killing children, women, and elders, forcing millions to leave Ukraine. Even with the special immigration measures, people are still having a hard time getting to safety. People with older identity documents are stuck in the system, further delaying their ability to get an emergency travel visa. Biometric centers are being overwhelmed, and in some centers, the wait is a month or longer. This wait is putting lives in danger. The most efficient way to get people out of harm's way remains visa-free travel. When will the Liberals lift visa requirements for Ukrainians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I mentioned, Canada will welcome Ukrainians fleeing Putin's war. And we've announced this new program that will cut through those red tape and expedite the arrival of Ukrainians to safe harbor for up to 3 years. This is the fastest, safest, and the most efficient way for Ukrainians to come to Canada. It eliminates most of the travel requirement and for all Ukrainian nationals, with the exception of the background of security. Mr. Speaker, Canada stands with Ukrainians in their time of need, and we welcome them with open arms.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley North.
Thank you, Speaker. Last year, Canada saw record levels of international trade, and our government continues to open new opportunities for Canadian business to export and to expand. The United Kingdom is one of our closest friends and largest trading partners. I know the Minister for International Trade has been working hard in strengthening our trade ties with UK. Can the Minister update us on her recent activities in diversifying our trade relations with the United Kingdom? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague from Don Valley North for that important question.
I was very pleased to welcome the Honourable Secretary of Trade, Trevelyan, for her first official visit to Canada this week, celebrating the long-standing relationship between Canada and the United Kingdom. Today, Canada and the United Kingdom officially launched negotiations towards a new high-standard and progressive free trade agreement. Canada looks forward to negotiating an agreement that will benefit our people, our economies, and helping businesses of all sizes and entrepreneurs on both sides of the Atlantic reach new export markets. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I asked whether this NDP Liberal government would provide Canadians who were unable to use ArriveCan with an easier alternative to allow them to visit their families out of Canada. Instead of answering the question, the Minister of Health sadly and predictably responded with the same tired, old talking points. Mr. Speaker, will this minister clearly tell Canadians what date this government will drop their mandates so that we can all travel freely?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Let me speak, Mr. Speaker, to something which I think is extremely important for us to understand. Long COVID. Among all those infected by COVID, whether being severe or mild, the estimate is that between 10 and 30% of them will suffer from long COVID. This has dramatic impacts on their lives in the short and longer term. 30% of them will need to consult more than 10 times after that. 30% of them will need to stop working. These have very significant health, personal, and economic costs. The way to protect partly against that is to protect against transmission and to do that through vaccination.
The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Mr. Speaker, 4 months ago, Donna McCall was denied the opportunity to see her children located in the U.S. while she was at home dying, waiting for a liver transplant. The transplant that never came. Her husband held up his phone so Donna could say their last goodbye to their mother while she died. Mr. Speaker, what happened to John and Donna and their children is devastating. When will this government show some compassion for suffering families like the McCalls? And please lift the federal mandates.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Compassion is the key word, Mr. Speaker. We need to have each other's back. We need to protect each other's health. That's best done by following public health measures, as most of us do today, but not all of us. It's also done by being vaccinated. That protects our health and those that we love. Mr. Speaker, that also protects against long COVID. By the way, long COVID affects all organs, all vital organs with 100 symptoms. The brain, the heart, the lungs, the liver. This is serious, Mr. Speaker, and demands responsibility on the part of the government.
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Saint-Charles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come from the Quebec City area, the most beautiful tourist spot in North America. It has suffered greatly since the beginning of the pandemic in recent years. We're talking about thousands of businesses, restaurants, and hotels. The Minister of Health is also a member from Quebec. How does he justify this to hotels and restaurant owners in his writing that he's maintaining health restrictions? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Two things that my colleague already knows, I believe, that I am a member for Quebec City, and I'm very proud of that. And I share this region with other many distinguished members of this House. The second thing that he probably knows is that on April 1st, in a few days, pre-arrival tests will be ended so that more people will be able to come to Canada to benefit from our lovely cities, and we hope that many will come to the Quebec City region. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago to this day, I was here asking them to close the borders. Things took too long, and some people died in Quebec before we closed our borders. Now, the situation has changed. It's taking too much time to reopen the borders and to remove restrictions that don't make sense. When tourists want to come to Quebec, for example, for the summer festival in your riding, the minister doesn't seem to understand what he has to do. Can we remove these complicated health conditions and allow tourists to come to our region? The Honourable Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, like my colleague knows, that's exactly what we're going to do on April 1st. On April 1st, testing measures that are pre-arrival to Canada will be removed, and this will make life easier for everyone and allow more people to come to see us in the beautiful Quebec City region. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, more than half of the children in Ukraine have fled the war. More than half of the country's children. 4.3 million children have left their homes. They're either elsewhere in Ukraine, hoping the Russian troops won't catch up with them, or they're in refugee camps. Today, we don't want the government to keep saying it has welcomed 10,000 Ukrainians since January. We want it to tell us what it's doing right now for millions of children on the run. When is it going to charter planes to go and get these children? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, certainly also for his cooperation since the beginning of this war. And I'd like to tell him that, yes, we are working with our partners, including airlines. But I'd also like to underscore in this House the exceptional work that was done with the Sick Kids Hospital and the department to welcome Ukrainian children that now can continue their treatment here in Canada. Mr. Speaker, we are going to take the necessary measures to welcome Ukrainians who are fleeing Putin's war. The honourable members for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the lack of an air bridge is a two-way problem. In Europe, millions of refugees are stuck in camps because there's no room for them on planes or because they can't pay. On the other side, in Montreal alone, there are 40 tons of humanitarian aid lying around in warehouses because we're unable to send it to Ukraine. Right now, the only thing we're able to move between Canada and Eastern Europe is the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, when is the government going to charter flights? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague greatly for his question. And yes, of course, the government, as he mentioned, we are looking to welcome as many people as possible and as quickly as possible. And that's what we've done since the beginning. 10 million Ukrainians have arrived here, and we're going to continue to work with our partners. But I'd like to stress in this House that the province of Quebec, well, it is not only volunteered to help these people, but it has helped us in terms of providing asylum and with health care and child care costs. Thank you.
For Kamloops, Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, the Health Minister has been asked about 15 questions today, and he hasn't answered a single one. So I hope he can answer this one. To a young woman named Nancy from my riding. Nancy is an Indigenous single mother. She works for the federal government 100% from home. She is vaccine hesitant for personal reasons. Like members of our armed forces, she's now being told that she cannot go to work and is essentially being fired for her beliefs. Nancy and others are running out of options. Will this minister show some compassion and end the mandate for people like Nancy so they can work from home?
Good job. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very pleased to receive this question, Mr. Speaker, because it enables me to add one more piece of information, this time from the United States. 1.1 million is the number of deaths that were avoided because of Americans having been vaccinated. I mentioned earlier that we could have avoided many more deaths with more vaccination as we've had in Canada. So when we speak to people who may be either concerned or sometimes not just informed about the benefits of vaccination, it's important to talk to them, reassure them, care with them. No, just encourage them in a very benevolent manner so that everyone at the end is protected, including those that would have been perhaps initially have misgivings around vaccination.
The Honourable Member for Peace River Westlock.
Mr. Speaker, in Canada and around the world, governments have ended their vaccine mandates and restrictions. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Nova Scotia have all ended their vaccine passport systems. However, this government is doubling down and spending $30 million for domestic travel vaccine passports in the next 2 years. Since the provinces have already dropped these passports, will the Minister of Health return this $30 million to the taxpayer?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mentioned earlier $4 billion. That's a lot of money, Mr. Speaker, which the federal government and other governments save because of high vaccination rates, in part due to vaccination mandates. But most importantly, this is a lot of household income, family income, income to look after children, to care for seniors, to look after those that may not be often find it easy to make ends meet. That's a lot of dollars, Mr. Speaker. It's not only about dollars, obviously, it's about lives, but dollars also are impacted by the fact that we have a high vaccination rate, and that as engineer, we have more people every day being vaccinated.
The Honourable Member for Peterborough, Kawartha.
A lot of replies today and not very many answers. Since the pandemic started, only 1% of all cases in COVID-19 in Canada have been related to travel, yet it has been portrayed and perceived as an unsafe thing to do. To put this into perspective, 2021 was supposed to be a year of recovery, but we have reached only 13% of the total number of international visitors compared to 2019. And 2021 was worse than 2020. When will the Health Minister tell his colleagues to fully open the border and remove federal vaccine mandates?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Speaker, COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on the industry, undoubtedly, and I want to stand here and thank all those who work in the aviation sector, all those who work in the tourism sector, who stepped up and cared for each other and did the right thing, got vaccinated, followed public health advice. Everybody knows that COVID-19 has been unpredictable. We're working together with our scientists, Mr. Speaker, to do the right thing, to protect Canadians and to protect those who work in the aviation sector. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, domestic violence, we've had enough of it. It concerns everyone because it breaks families and creates serious damage to our society. I salute the work done by community organizations in the region to help women and children who are fleeing this violence that are caused by abusive spouses. I announced a $4.5 million grant to the Nouvelle Étape organization for new spots. Can the Minister of Housing, Diversity and Inclusion tell us about the benefits of this investment? The Honourable Minister. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we have seen the most vulnerable people in our communities fall into greater need of housing, and we knew we had to act quickly. In the Honourable Member's writing, our government is creating 9 new affordable housing units for women and children fleeing violence. We will continue to work until every Canadian has a safe and affordable home. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, there has been many questions that I've asked the Minister of Health since the beginning, but I'm going to change things a bit today. I'd like the Minister of Health to look me in the eyes right now and tell me that the federal mandate is what has saved so many people in Canada since the beginning of the pandemic, and not vaccine passports from different provinces that are responsible for this, and that provinces that have these passports have data that show that we can remove them. When will the government remove federal mandates, and when will the minister listen to science Canada-wide, not just in his party? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to be able to hear my colleague talk about science, and he's interested in the studies that I'm talking about. And we're very happy to present figures and data that can be used and confidence intervals. But now, the 1,600 deaths that were avoided, Mr. Speaker, it's a combination of different vaccine passports. But our federal mandate did play a role. The Conservatives were against such a policy, and it would have created hundreds, if not thousands, of additional deaths. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives were the first to push in this House for this government to buy vaccines and to provide them for all Canadians. We were the first, while they were slow to take action. I have no lessons to learn from the Minister of Health right now. All he's told us today is that 1,600, 300, 500, 4 billion, many, many figures. But he didn't answer my question at least once. When he announced the end of health measures federally. That's what the question is. It's simple. We just want an answer. The Honourable Minister of Health. If I showed a lack of respect to my colleague, I apologize for that. That wasn't my intention. I respectfully offer him all the support and help he needs and that he deserves as a member in this House. I think he has the right to have access to all the information at any time, and he does play a solid role within the Conservative caucus. The honourable member for Mégantic. May he table this information, all the studies here in the House that is necessary, that talks about the federal mandate and Dr. New. And the National Vaccine Committee said that these mandates were no longer necessary and that we have to focus on voluntary vaccination. These are figures, but the Minister of Health keeps on telling us that there are studies that show that this was justified by science, but we want an answer. When will he end the vaccine obligations? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you. There are two questions, one that I can't answer and one that I will answer. When COVID-19 will end, unfortunately, I can't answer that, but in terms of having access to additional information, I will try to be as clear as possible, but I'd be very happy to provide them this information in the most appropriate manner possible. The Honourable Member for Dalval-Lachine-LaSalle.
Yemen is undergoing the world's worst humanitarian crisis, and its people deserve decisive action, especially women and girls who are disproportionately affected. Canadians are deeply concerned by the raging conflict and the deteriorating food security situation. What is the Minister of International Development doing to help the people of Yemen? Thank you.
Honourable Minister of International Development.
Speaker, I want to thank the member from Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle for this question and for her hard work as well. The conflict in Yemen continues to impact almost 20 million people who need help, especially women and children. This is why last week I announced an additional $62.5 million in funding to help with urgent humanitarian needs. By providing food assistance, clean water and sanitation, protection and health care, this aid will help the Yemeni people whose lives have been impacted by this. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Speaker, in December, the government announced the reallocation of crab fishing licenses in my riding in an effort to reconcile the loss of constitutionally protected Indigenous fishing rights. Well, it's absolutely essential to correct historical wrongs in the allocation and management of this fishery. The government has failed to properly consult the impacted fishers or First Nations. As a result, many fishers will lose the income their families need. Will the government do the right thing and fully compensate these crab fishers, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for pointing out the importance of including Indigenous communities who have a right to fish in the fisheries. And we are having those discussions with the crab harvesters who had those licenses. This takes some time, but we are doing that, Mr. Speaker, and those discussions haven't concluded yet, but we will respect both the prior fish harvesters and the Indigenous rights to fish.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite misguided calls for Canada to build pipelines to join a global effort to shut off Russian oil, the international experts at the International Energy Agency have not recommended that. In fact, they've been very clear that it's not boosting production the world's nations need to do, it's cutting consumption. The International Energy Agency has published a 10-point plan. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm having difficulty finishing my question.
Order. Just a little decorum. We're on the last question. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't start over. I'll summarize that there have been calls that are misguided and not based on evidence to increase production or take another decade to build more pipelines in Canada. The experts at the International Energy Agency have published a 10-point plan that they want industrialized countries to pursue, and that will cut consumption by 2.7 million barrels of oil a day. The International Energy Agency 10-point plan calls for such things as cutting speed limits by 10 kilometers an hour in industrialized countries, to cut down traffic in our city centres and boost public transit. Will Canada join the IEA 10-point plan?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, the 10-point plan is under discussion right now with the Minister of Natural Resources in Paris. In the face of the emerging global energy crisis created by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the 10-point plan to cut oil use proposes actions that can be used to reduce demand with immediate impact. And as discussed in the plan, the IEA and its members are committed to reducing emissions and create a more sustainable path for the longer term, from using public transit, biking, or working from home. Those are all actions that we can take as per the IEA to reduce our carbon footprint and collectively reduce our emissions. We are working in partnership here at home and abroad to reduce emissions and increase the use of renewable energies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that's all the time for question period today.
I see a point of order from the member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, following an exchange that took place during question period with the health minister, who has committed to table documents here in this House, I would ask, please, that he table all documents related to all of the numbers that he mentioned: 8,000, 7,000, 25,000, 135,000, 400,000, and also the 10 to 35% of cases of long COVID that were mentioned. I would also invite the Minister of Health to table the documents to justify the federal vaccine mandate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that is debate, but at the same time, it's always good to see numbers. Point of order.
The honourable member for Courtenay-Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my observation just now is my good friend and colleague from Saanich Gulf Islands just tried to get through a question in this House. And the amount of heckling that came from this side is completely unacceptable. Mr. Speaker,